Joel, good morning. Some of you may have had a chance to watch the video that Joel's family made at his 80th birthday. And one of the highlights for me was seeing Joel in a football uniform, both looking good and then looking not so good after what looked like some awful injuries playing football. And that tells us that, like many young Jewish boys, Joel was more interested in sports than he was in going to religious school. But Joel, your journey back to Judaism began when you were practicing medicine as an intern, and you fell in love with a Christian woman who was then working as a psychiatric nurse. Do you want to tell us about both falling in love and then what happened afterwards?
Well, how much do you want to know about falling in love?
Whatever you want to say.
She was and is spectacular in every way. But let me just, first of all, I too want to thank all those beautiful greetings that I've received on the chat box. I want to really thank Audrey and Rachel and Rima and others who put together this program. And also I'm indebted to Avery, who's sharing her bat mitzvah with me. And there's a shout out here for two other members of my family, Eden Sir and Sebastian Breman, who are having their bar mitzvahs this year also, and as is Rawiki Zergadasi in Vancouver. So this is a big celebration year. So for bar and bat mitzvahs, and many of them, all of them know Hebrew much better than I do, as you saw from my writings. The meeting of Vicky was very special because I had not been entirely lapsed from my tie with Judaism at that time. My family bought a whole load of Israel bonds. They followed what was going on in Israel, as did I, but I was just not affiliated in any way with the mother church, so to speak. But Vicky's background in her congregational church really allowed her, and she was interested in reading history, and she knew the New Testament and does exceedingly well, and now the Old Testament. So that's where I first began. And she's very pragmatic and soft and loving. And the decision was made, well, by many of us, that if we had children, they would be Jewish. No question. And for that to occur, Vicky said, I'm going to convert and learn more. And so then I joined her as an intern. I don't know how I got a couple hours a week to go to class with her. And quite frankly, the classes didn't do much more for me than they did when I was in confirmation school. But anyway, she did a lot for me and still does.
There we go. So you were living in Los Angeles, Joel, when you met Vicky. You were born in Chicago, I know. Why don't you just tick off quickly the other places that you've lived in your life so we have a sense of just how adventurous a life it has been?
Well, I have to take off my shoes and socks and take off Vicky's gloves to start counting the places, but we lived in 14 different places in the first 10 years, moving around, getting training in epidemiology and medicine, working for the CDC, going off to Africa, and then getting training in Boston and moving to London for more training, and on and on. So we lived around the world in my formative years, but so I was working on a great program that President Johnson and our government supported for smallpox eradication and measles control in West Africa. So that really brought me to all these places. And then I got a special career development award from the
Honoring
CDC.
Joel.
That's enough.
So keep going, Joel. You were in.
Keep going. Well, Vicky's got some comments here.
Go ahead, Vicky.
She
Dig
says
in.
I might have forgotten the temporary housing in Conakry, Guinea before we moved to permanent housing, and on and on. But yeah, we moved a lot of different places. Many of us did when you're early in your career, particularly working on global health. So yeah, then I moved, I guess you'd call them promotions or more responsibility, to Geneva, Switzerland, working assigned to the World Health Organization. And then after smallpox was eradicated, big event in the world, certainly in our lives, I moved back to the US, where Vicky began law school. That's what she always wanted to do as a young girl. She left home at age 17 to attend nursing school and had to tuck away higher education at that time. And traveling to all these different places with me, and we had kids, and that was her responsibility. So anyway, we moved back to Georgia, where the CDC is located. She got her law degree in Athens at the University of Georgia. And lo and behold, we then, moved to Washington, D.C., where she was, after she had a meteoric rise in the Department of Agriculture. But this is about me, so we'll stop there.
And by the way, I should have said at the beginning, if any of you have questions for Joel, please type them into the chat and we will get to them as soon as we can. So Joel, you mentioned the eradication of smallpox, which really was a landmark event in public health. I know you were very early to help identify Ebola way back in the 1970s. If you had to identify one of your professional accomplishments that's been the most meaningful to you, what would that be and why?
Well, certainly the historic, monumental defeat of smallpox, which had been on Earth for millennia, was number one. To have been in the Palais des Nations, the United Nations special room where they have the meeting of all the countries of the world. We were there, Vicky and I, with the two, Matthew and Johanna, when they were very young, in that room when smallpox eradication was declared gone. It was declared eradicated, was number one. But I would say working on other issues have been, all of them, gratifying. Certainly seeing the first Ebola outbreak when we didn't even know what it was in 1976 was spectacular. And we lived to tell the story, and we're still telling the story because it was a discovery and a description that hadn't been done before. But I would say moving over to the most important parasitic disease, malaria, one that ravaged our country up until 1955, as a matter of fact, before it was gone, and defining the actual burden was really something that I thoroughly am proud of and enjoyed, because up to that time, the numbers were not clear. The importance of it in pregnant women and in very young children was not crisply defined. So I spent a lot of time as an epidemiologist, not just with paper and pencil, which was the computer of the day, but with a lot of young people working with me and in the field, spent months and months in the field working on that disease. So those are two of many challenges that I've had.
Joel, one piece of advice you offered when your family said, how do you stay as vibrant as you do as you grow older? You said, stay vertical, but the other one was cherish family. And I imagine, given the professional obligations you had and the need to move from place to place, you had to be pretty intentional about that. I think we'd like to know how you expressed that idea of cherishing family over all these years.
Well, I must say I was an itinerant husband and father for months and months. I had several missions overseas. Some of them were 2 and 3 months, I must say. But when I was home, I tried to focus in particular on the kids and support Vicky. I was a coach of my son's soccer team, much to his great regret, I think. I knew nothing about the game. I went to Johanna, my daughter's, I guess, brownie, maybe young Girl Scout meetings. I was the only man in some of those sessions. So I did my best, tried to focus on them, had a lot of laughs, and did reading with them early in the morning and very late at night. Reading was always very, very important to me and to them when they were young. So I joked around a lot, and I think imparted ways, and traveled with them. Each time when they graduated high school, I took them to Africa for several weeks.
Wow.
With my daughter, we climbed Mount Kilimanjaro together. We made it, matter of fact. And for Matthew, we were in West Africa for 3 weeks, and he was pretty much of an extern, collecting urines from the children when we were studying malaria, doing a lot of other things. So those are the ways. I'm not so sure if they were happy to go off to Africa when they had boyfriends and other things to do in the US, but I think they got a lot out of those trips.
Couple of questions already popped up here. Someone mentions that you make an appearance in a wonderfully readable book called The Hot Zone. And Jeff Spieler says I should ask you about the work you did work you have done at the Fogarty International Center. What was that all about?
Well, let me first address The Hot Zone, which was written by my friend Richard Preston. Probably many people on the screen have read that. There's a lot of science fiction in that book. People don't just bleed out of every possible orifice minutes after they get the disease. It's a bloodborne disease, like hepatitis, HIV. It is very, very severe once you get it. You have a high chance of dying. But anyway, there's another book written by a very dead friend of mine named Bill Close called Ebola, recently reissued by his daughter, Glenn Close, the actress. We worked with Bill for several months and became close friends. So if you're interested in that. So at the Fogarty Center, that was a different curve in my career. When Vicky was nominated by John Lewis, actually, the congressman, for a high-level position in the Department of Agriculture in Washington, I said, honey, go for it. And we moved to Washington, and I got a job at the Fogarty Center doing something very different, involved in managing and directing programs to train public health scientists from poor countries, linking them with those in the United States. So I managed a number of different programs. And I started the infectious diseases program at the Fogarty Center at NIH, but one of the other programs was population and health. And that included leaders at USAID, which Jeff Spieler was our link and partner, as was Bob Spiritus. at NIH. So that was one of the most gratifying things I've done more recently, because I've had an effect with a lot of money, more than we had ever had before, from many partners, to link Northern scientists with those in poor countries, to train them in epidemiology, clinical medicine, public health, policy, technology transfer. And we have trained over 6,000 scientists from poor countries and many from our own country. So you have a much greater impact when you see it from 100,000 feet and have the resources to enact programs. CDC, we didn't have that kind of money or that purview.
We've got a few COVID questions, but before we go to them, I want to jump way back. What inspired you to become a doctor and then become an epidemiologist, work with diseases that affect some of the poorest people in the world?
No specific answer for that. Full disclosure, there were no health folks in my family at all.
Huh.
My grandfather was a junk man, first degree immigrant, came in through New York. My other grandfather came in through Boston. He was sort of a ne'er-do-well. So when I went to school, I took liberal arts. My favorite courses in middle and early high school were Latin and literature. Science, I was good at science, but not really at the top of the heap. And in college, I went to UCLA. It was a great place. But I was an indifferent student when I first began. I was mainly interested in athletics, social, and it was only toward my last year when I had self-reflection and said, I would rather be a doctor than anything else. So I read a lot about medicine, about science. It just came out of the blue. And when I went to medical school, I asked all my classmates, how come they're in medical school? And you had 1,000 different answers, from I'll be comfortable in living, make some money. Others were highly idealistic. Others said, I work well with my hands, wanted to be a surgeon. So there was no one answer, really. So anyway, my answer was idealistic at that time. That came probably from my mother, who was the center midfielder of our entire family there. Socially interested, the little money that we had went out to others in need. She was a great counselor. So social activism came within my family, but not anything to do with medicine. Relative to global health, I had a professor of infectious diseases who was a mentor and then became a friend, Paul Wehrle. And after a couple of years of residency in internal medicine at LA County Hospital, now Vicki and I were married for a year, but I looked at my intern's book at that time was the biggest hospital in the country. A good number of my patients had one disease that was undermining everything else. Alcoholism. It affects every system. Now, I love the patients at the county hospital, but I said, Paul, I'd like to see the rest of the world. And he told me about this new program, smallpox eradication and measles control in West Africa, that we were now supporting. And I applied and was accepted. And I worked in Guinea for 2 years, which had the second highest frequency of smallpox in the world at that time when we went. And in 2 years, it was gone.
Mm.
So here I had a country of, at that time, 4 million, and you could eliminate a disease in 2 years and control another devastating. Measles is devastating in the young kids, as we all know. So I then said, well, my patients, I now have 4 million people as my community of care, and I love the people. So I said I needed more training, went back for training, and then the rest is history. I just stayed in infectious diseases and public health. But I had several questions. I loved clinical medicine. I had some great offers in universities, private practice. And to this day, I just wonder if I should have gone to Wilshire Boulevard or K Street or Park Avenue, who knows what.
So,
My license, I kept my medical practice license up till very recently, mainly because I'm called often, I had been called often on airplanes to
oh,
help people who are sick, but I've used the license in other ways.
so I don't know if other Adat Shalomers know this, but Joel is the current president of the American Society of Tropical Medicine and Hygiene. And in that role, on January 30th, now think about where we were on January 30th, he wrote an op-ed in the newspaper The Hill, which circulates among congressional staffers and congresspeople. And here's what he wrote. There's much we don't know about the new coronavirus, but early evidence is ominous and suggests we must take strong measures to prevent it from becoming pandemic. This is January 30th. Sadly, that did not happen, but it didn't happen fast enough in any case. But Joel, given where we all are now, how would you advise all of us, I don't want to look back, but how would you advise all of us to think about and prepare for the weeks and months ahead?
Okay, let me just say, everything will be okay in the end. Don't despair. If it's not okay, it's not the end, okay? And we'll continue on. Get out, get some exercise, but plan in detail in your house if you get sick. So start with yourself and your family and your community. The second most important thing is be sure you vote this fall, because leadership is the key for everything. And we're getting a lot of cross signals. And most of the world is paying attention to Tony Fauci, America's doctor, who's really explained things with clarity and content. And let me assure you that we are moving forward with treatments and preventions. So I think starting personally in your family and explaining to them that we've been through these things before, we've been through epidemics of influenza, we've been through epidemics, yes, polio, we've been through, the world has been through multiple plague epidemics and a lot of different scares. We've had anthrax. So, yeah, I mean, we're gonna get through this, and we still don't know the extent. So I think a lot of the anxiety comes, is it gonna come to me? How about asymptomatic? How about wearing the masks? Are they any good? Let's get back to work. I don't have a paycheck and all that. We have to do testing not just for a virus, but for serology, where you know if someone has had this. So anyway, science is gonna give us answers, and we're gonna have those answers soon. But I'm glad it's been declared a pandemic. Our society is now countering the president's move to pull out our resources and activity in the World Health Organization. That is dangerous, that is counterproductive, and we will block it. And we've already started that with congressmen, letters to important people. That will not happen. The World Health Organization has done so many things, one of which is every year chooses the components of the influenza vaccine, which we all receive every year. So I do want to mention something that hasn't been publicized. That is, I hope everyone on this call, their families and friends of their families, have their flu vaccination and their pneumonia vaccination if they're old enough and qualified, and that their children in their orbit have the childhood vaccinations. So that's something that we could do with proven interventions and will save lives.
Okay, I think we're running out of time. Let me ask you one more question about COVID, if you don't mind, and then we'll wrap up on what I think might be a lighter note. And that is, what kind of time frame are we looking at to get to the end of this, or something that at least feels like the end of it? I know that's hard to say, but your estimate is as good as anyone's, I would imagine.
Well, it's hard to say. I've learned in working with a lot of different control and eradication campaigns, never to put an event and a date in the same sentence. Really, just to work hard toward. And Tony Fauci says and the rest of us say the microbe, the virus, the bacteria will dictate that. It's really the microbe's genes against our wits. That's the constant battle that we have with infectious diseases. We're constantly aware of a second wave when we let up our guard. We've had third waves historically with influenza. I'm spending a lot of my time now in helping to define the problem in the low-income countries, Africa, India, South America. The disease can be devastating in places where they don't have water or soap to wash their hands, much less places to isolate, different cultures. So we're working with those. We have close friends, leaders, and so that's where my eye is on now, what's going on in the Southern Hemisphere, where respiratory diseases have a different epidemiological pattern. But hold fast, do the right thing. Vicky's made a dozen masks in her sewing machine. Young girls, remember what a sewing machine was? Vicky and people in our family, I think, know how to do this. So do something that makes you feel good and serves your community. But get outside, get some fresh air, see the flowers. You ought to see the lovely flowers in our neighborhood here in Chevy Chase.
Joel, this is a planted question, I think, from a relative of yours, but I will wrap up with it. What is the Dragons Club?
Oh.
Okay. The Dragons were and are a group of young boys, now old men, who banded together to raise hell. Actually, we started in grammar school, and I'm very happy to say one of my closest friends from that epoch, starting in 4th grade, Walter Cohen, will be speaking to you in a few weeks, and he might answer more about that. So anyway, we were a social club that actually played a lot of sports together and did some social action. One of our classmates in junior high school had leukemia, and we banded together at that age to throw a major fundraiser for the City of Hope in Los Angeles, the major cancer treatment center. So we did some mitzvah work even at that age. Yeah.
It's great. That's,
And this group still meets.
oh, there we go, Rachel. Thank you. So Joel, thank you so much for sharing all this. Thank you even more for the work that you're doing. We did have one question that just came in while you were answering, which is, given the prospects in the developing world, is there a charity or an organization that people on this call might want to support to help out there? And then I want to mute myself and hear your answer and then turn it back to Rachel.
Well, there are a number of different charities that work in poor countries. I think Save the Children is one that we fully support. The World Health Organization Foundation is something that certainly needs help at this particular time. But I think, you know, all of the international charities are really focusing on, and we have partners in health, and certainly one of my favorites is Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders. They are unbelievable in going to the front lines, irrespective of political beliefs, even when the country opposes their arrival. So, and those are just a few, but your own inclination. And I have to also mention my favorite in the US because of major problems is Southern Poverty Law Center. Wouldn't think of that when you say what to do, but that opposes oppression in our country, which is a constant peril to our people, to our tribe.
Rachel, do you want to wrap this up?
Yeah, thank you so, so much, Joel, and also Mark, for bringing us through this wonderful conversation, and Joel for giving us a wider glimpse of your life, of your journey, and of your wonderful persona, which has shined around Adat Shalom for a number of years, but it's a special pleasure this morning to get to see it a little more up close.